My name is Anne-Marie Bruner-Tracey, and I've been teaching intercultural communication online during the May 2020 term. Our class of 29 students met daily for 3 weeks for approximately 3 hours of class discussion time and generally a film. And while it was certainly a large skill set for such a truncated time period, I thoroughly enjoyed teaching this class. In my opinion, St. Mary has been incredibly mindful of facilitating an agile educational adjustment for students and faculty who've been impacted this spring. And yes, absolutely, it's been challenging at times, but the college worked really hard to ensure that the transmission of knowledge and skills would continue for students. And I've been honored to be able to be a part of that, most particularly since the hugely disappointing cancellation of our May modules, which rocked a lot of people's worlds. One really important thing for me to try to communicate with everyone, and most especially our students, which I tried to do over and over in this class, is that despite all the challenges and all of the social grieving and loss from the direct interactions with their peers, this whole situation is a glorious learning experience, most particularly for intercultural competencies and employability. So one of the key points that I tried to get across is being a desirable employee, one of your most significant assets is adaptability, flexibility to whatever comes. And alongside cultural intelligence, successful people are able to roll, change their modes of operation flexibly, and do their best to remain relevant and needed. The tech skills that we developed during this class were presenting, collaborating across distance, and communicating successfully to navigate the increased likelihood of your pitfalls and failed communication events when you don't have the normal social and visual cues to operate with, because you rely so heavily on those in a face-to-face situation, and you can kind of back up and backpedal and get yourself out of an uncomfortable situation, possibly to an extent that it's difficult to do online. So you have to be more mindful in crafting your message, particularly across cultures. And I think that this is going to certainly, all of these skills are going to certainly be part of everyone's needed skill set moving forward, most especially after the 2020 pandemic. One thing, since this was my first 100% online class, I also learned a lot, including things that I will improve upon in future. And the students were really helpful too. They told me ideas that I could use in the classroom platform that we had for our virtual classroom. And to be honest, even in a traditional classroom in future, I'm going to incorporate some of these virtual aspects, particularly the group collaboration and the virtual presentations, where students were required to put together a presentation to be delivered virtually as a group from 4 or 5 different locations, obviously because they couldn't get together in the same room and record it. So some of those students were more successful than others, but that's part of the learning experience. Every one of them was a success because everyone learned a skill from that. For me, one of the most unexpected things was the lack of visual interaction in the online classroom. Only one other student consistently kept their camera on, so to a certain extent, that increased my self-consciousness to a point that I had not expected, and nor had I mentally prepared myself for the 3-hour Bruner-Tracey show every day. So, but that being said, I still feel like I was able to get a sense of student involvement, engagement, and to a certain extent, personalities for probably a little over half of the class. One student mentioned in his feedback that he would have liked for me to call out people more, and he said, you should have been meaner. But it was, to me, it was a little bit difficult to do that, partly because of the lack of those visual cues, but also I was aware that some students did not have a mic audio on their device, and a couple of students had ongoing Wi-Fi issues. Some other students had more people in the house than just themselves in a room listening to the class or participating in the class. So that was a bit difficult to navigate. One thing though that is also an unknown until you're in the situation is that discussion by chat by typing creates an uncomfortably long period of silence after a question is asked if one doesn't have a way to tell whether someone is typing or not, and whether you're meant to wait for that person to come up with their response to the question. And one tricky thing was the showing of films. Originally, I had intended to show fewer films on a narrower range of cultural topics with a goal for deeper discussion and more activities. But because class discussion was actually quite challenging for much of the time, it allowed me to, again, flexibly adjust and introduce additional cultural communication examples into the classroom sphere. And I believe it was effective. In a classroom situation, one would just pop the film on and show it. But the online class meant that for the films that were rented or purchased or on membership platforms that were my membership platforms, these films had to be part of the classroom recording instead of assigning them as homework assignments. Again, to be mindful of the cost impacts on students. One of our most impactful films was Dakota 38, which is an online documentary, and it incorporates the story of the largest mass execution in US history. Only one of the students in the classroom had heard of this incident previously, and the students were frankly shocked that President Abraham Lincoln signed the order. So that clearly related and added to our discussion on topics of cultural conflict and the communication surrounding that. One pleasant surprise as well was that students appreciated our guests much more than I expected, and this was, again, surprisingly simple to coordinate, which was a real boon to the class. What I love most about Centenary is its incomparable sense of community, and while there are certainly improvements I will make in future, this class allowed a small replication of this community during the lockdown. Forward Centenary.